So we welcome all the delegates and faculty to this afternoon session on 27th September of ISPGHAN Econ 2020. So we have three presentations during this session, which is on the afternoon of 27th September. The first presentation is on a case number 5, which is a child with isolated splenomegaly. So we welcome the three faculty that we are having in this case presentation. The moderator of this presentation would be Dr. Ava Nagral, who needs no introduction. She's a senior consultant hepatologist at Apollo and Jaslok Hospitals, Mumbai, with special interest in pediatric hepatology and liver transplantation, and has multiple publications in different index and international journals. The second faculty is Professor Sutapa Ganguly. She's one of the most pediatric gastroenterologist in the country. She is the professor and head of pediatrics and is in charge of the pediatric gastroenterology and hepatology unit at KPC Medical College and Hospital, Kolkata. And ma'am has multiple publications in different index journals. The third faculty is Dr. Prasant K. Soban. He is one of the young budding pediatric gastroenterologists who has a distinction of holding a DM gastroenterology degree. He's a consultant pediatric gastroenterologist, SAT Hospital, and assistant professor, Department of Gastroenterology at Government Medical College, Thiruvananthapuram, Kerala. And his special interests are in pediatric liver diseases and therapeutic GI endoscopy. And as you can see, he also has multiple publications in this field. So now I am handing over the proceedings to Dr. Ava Nagral, ma'am, who would be moderating this session.
Good afternoon, everybody. We often see a child who is incidentally picked up as having a splenomegaly. And the whole idea of this presentation today is to discuss one such case. May I ask Dr. Palak Mehta, who's a PG student in pediatrics at Jaslok Hospital, to start with the case.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm going to be presenting a case of a child with splenomegaly. A 6-year-old male child, first by birth order, born of non-consanguineous marriage, Maharashtrian, came with complaints of its distension of abdomen since 3 years of age. The distension was insidious in onset, it was progressive, and the mother also noticed a lump on the left side of the abdomen. The mother also complained that the child was very easily fatigable. The milestones were normal, but the child had poor growth. The mother gave a history that the child was very short compared to his peers. The birth history, the child was a full-term normal vaginal delivery, cried immediately after birth. The birth weight was 2.5 kg and the neonatal period was uneventful.
Yes. Now at this stage, I would like to ask Dr. Ganguly, what do you think you would want to ask to get more information on what the likely diagnosis could be? So what more symptoms would you want to ask in the history?
Thank you, Dr. Ava, for the question. And at the onset, I would like to thank the ISPGHAN Con 2020 team with the leadership of Dr. John Mathai for this wonderful e-conference, and I'm delighted to participate for the first time in such a platform. Now, this is for a male child, first in birth order. There is no history of consanguinity, and the abdominal lump is there for 3 years. The child gets fatigued easily, so maybe there is associated pallor. The physical milestones are normal. So I'd like to know what about the mental milestone, that is the intellectuality of the child and the cognitive development. The child is full-term normal deliveries and the birth weight was in range. So whether there is any history of jaundice, whether there is any family history of sibling death, whether there is any history of bruising in the child, does the child complain of pain in the legs and extreme hands, that is bone pain is there or not? Is there any history of blood vomiting? And what is the present anthropometric measurements? Is the child stunted as well as wasted? These are the few questions, and whether there is any history of previous abdominal infections, fever, or history of umbilical catheterization or umbilical sepsis in the neonatal period. Though the neonatal period is uneventful, it's mentioned. So these are the few questions I would like to ask from the mother.
Thank you, Dr. Sutapa. You've mentioned a whole lot of questions. Would Dr. Prashant want to add something?
Thanks, madam, for the opportunity. I would like to ask whether the boy has received any blood transfusions.
No. There's no history of any blood transfusions. And most of the things, besides this history, all the questions which Dr. Sutapa asked, the answer is no. So all the other questions, whichever Dr. Sutapa has asked, the answer is no. There's no history of jaundice or any other symptom which Dr. Sutapa asked. So I think we will now move on to the symptoms. Now, this child, if I were to say, we want to analyze the symptoms with splenomegaly, and this is to just make it clear to the audience. Most of these questions have been asked by the panelists. What we want to do is categorize them into syndromes, or give a syndromic diagnosis to the symptoms. So if you have a child with jaundice, ascites, altered sensorium, all of which Dr. Sutapa mentioned, you would think of liver cell failure and portal hypertension. So that would be the cause of splenomegaly. On the other hand, if you have a child with GI bleed, you would think of portal hypertension alone, because you could have a patient who has portal hypertension but no liver cell failure, a non-cirrhotic cause of portal hypertension. And as Dr. Sutapa mentioned, if there's any history of umbilical sepsis or catheterization at the time of birth, or any abdominal sepsis, then it has a bearing on the diagnosis. It could be something called extrahepatic portal venous obstruction, which we will talk about in a little bit more detail in a few slides from now. Also, if there are bone pains, fractures, deformities, family history of similar disease, then the syndromic diagnosis becomes a storage disorder. Again, these questions have been asked by the panelists. If there is history of any blood transfusion, meaning the hemoglobin is low, or repeated infections, meaning the white cell count is low, or bleeding from any site, meaning the platelet count is low, it would imply that there is splenomegaly with hypersplenism. And then if there are any neurological symptoms, that may give a clue to a storage disorder, which is associated with neurological problems as well. So this would in general be an approach to symptoms with splenomegaly, which were mentioned by the panelists. Palak, you may continue.
Okay, so general examination of the child in our case, vitally the child was normal. Anthropometrically, the child looked there was significant growth failure. So the height and weight were plotted on the growth chart, which showed that the child fell far below the 3rd percentile. The height and the weight are less than the 3rd percentile, as you can see on the growth chart. There was significant pallor. There was no icterus, no lymphadenopathy, no petechiae or ecchymosis, and there were no signs of liver cell failure. Also, there was no evidence of any hemolytic phases. On systemic examination, per abdomen, the abdomen was distended, umbilicus was stretched and everted. On palpation, there was a firm hepatomegaly 2 centimeters below the right costal margin, and the margins were rounded. And it was non-tender. The span was 8 centimeters. Spleen was 15 centimeters below the left costal margin and firm. There was no free fluid in the abdomen. Hernial orifices were normal. CNS examination was within normal limit, and all the rest systems were within normal limits. Ma'am.
Yeah, so I would now want to ask the panelists, is it normal to have a palpable spleen in the child, Dr. Sutapa?
Palpable spleen may be palpable in 30% cases in newborn, and by 6 months it comes down to less than 10%. And beyond 6 months of age, spleen palpable 2 centimeter without any chance of spleen being pushed down by some respiratory cause or some developmental cause, deformity in the ligaments. Palpable spleen in the 2 centimeter palpable spleen in the left costal margin beyond 6 months of age is significant.
Right. So there are actually a normogram. There's an ultrasound study which was done at various age groups in various age groups of children, and it was found that, and this is something which one could take a picture of, where you can see that as the age progresses, the upper limit of the spleen size obviously goes up, and by 12 years of age, it's more or less what one would expect in an adult. So I think it's useful to have this normogram in front of you to analyze whether a child has a significantly enlarged spleen or not. Dr. Prashant, what would be your differential diagnosis?
The symptoms of the child actually began insidiously, and the child has been having easy fatigability, but has never been transfusion dependent. And at the same time, child is having massive splenomegaly and mild hepatomegaly. So I would like to consider the possibility of some storage disorder, or even the possibility of a chronic hemolytic anemia. Even though transfusion history is not there, maybe some mild variant. The other reasons like infections, malignancies and all, I would not like to entertain because of the chronic duration of the symptoms.
Right.
And one more thing is like the splenomegaly is so massive, so the possibility of an extrahepatic portal vein obstruction should also be considered. But this child has so far has not blood also, so that was also to be kept in mind.
So you could have a child with extrahepatic portal venous obstruction coming with just a splenomegaly without variceal bleed, or you will rule it out if there's no bleed?
The classical presentation is with bleed and all, but still a subset still can have.
So you could have a child just incidentally picked up to have a splenomegaly and not come with a bleed, and it could still be portal hypertension and EHPVO, which is the commonest cause of portal hypertension.
Yes.
What about a massive splenomegaly? You would expect that in a EHPVO, the kind of splenomegaly this child has?
But what is more striking in this case is the massive splenomegaly. That is a little bit at odd. We have some other conditions like NCPF also coming into the picture. But that again, for that also, so early presentation, the child is only 6 years old. Even then, there is no history of bleed. So my first contention will be more in favor of some storage disorder versus some chronic hemolytic anemia.
Right. Okay. So coming to the differential diagnosis, we think that it is a good idea to have a broad classification. As Dr. Prashant rightly mentioned, a child has come with a bleed or manifestation of portal hypertension, or there is no portal hypertension. Now, if there is portal hypertension, Dr. Sutapa, we can go through these points one by one. Do you think the child has cirrhosis?
That it is with all normal features and no history of jaundice, it is unlikely to be a case of cirrhosis. And even if it is cirrhosis, it is maybe secondary to some storage disorder, and it is a post-viral hepatitis cirrhosis.
Fine.
So
unlikely.
there is a huge splenohepatomegaly with some pallor, and the child has not bled yet. So my first coin will go towards the storage disorder, that is the Gaucher's disease, which classical type of Gaucher's disease, which presents splenohepatomegaly. And
Dr. Sutapa, sorry, may I interrupt? I just want to go point-wise, diagnosis-wise, points in favor and against. We talk of cirrhosis. You said unlikely to be cirrhosis. Could it be non-cirrhotic cause of portal hypertension?
Yes, no, it can be non-cirrhotic cause of portal hypertension, but in EHPVO, we do in 15% cases, they may present only with splenomegaly for evaluation and further investigation. But in EHPBO, we don't have that large spleen.
Right.
Spleen may be larger in case of non-cirrhotic portal fibrosis, but there the age of presentation is a little older. They present 7 to 8 years of age or beyond that. Congenital hepatic fibrosis is a possibility that can present as portal hypertension, and maybe with hepatomegaly, if the hepatomegaly is firm hepatomegaly, then it will clinch the diagnosis of congenital hepatic fibrosis. But in non-cirrhotic portal fibrosis or EHPBO, usually the liver is not palpable, and in EHPBO, spleen is not that large. Non-cirrhotic portal fibrosis usually presents at an older age, and here the spleen size may be large, but not 15 centimeters. 8, 9, 10 centimeters is okay. Budd-Chiari syndrome, it usually presents with acute distension of the abdomen, and hepatomegaly, it takes a long time to proceed to the chronic stage and development of cirrhosis of liver. Usually it presents with prominent collateral veins in the abdomen, flanks, and inferior vena cava obstruction in the back, with intractable ascites, but not with that much of big spleen.
Yes.
And without portal hypertension, infiltrating.
Can I ask Dr. Prashant to take that, please? Dr. Prashant.
Yes, ma'am. Coming to the possibility of those conditions which present without portal hypertension, it has been mentioned, it can be stratified into infiltrative disorders, storage disorders, or hemolytic disorders. If we take the infiltrative disorders like CML, myelofibrosis, and lymphoma, they are actually quite unusual in this particular age group. The boy is only 6 years old, so we will not entertain those possibilities. Then regarding the storage disorders, Gaucher, Niemann-Pick B, and Saposin C deficiency could be possibility, because they can present with insidiously detected splenohepatomegaly for that matter. And for the hemolytic disorders like thalassemia intermedia could also be considered, but the splenomegaly is a little bit massive. So for that matter, we can put even other hemolytic disorders like hereditary spherocytosis also.
Yeah, but the spleen would be much smaller there also.
Much smaller, much smaller.
Yeah, much smaller. So basically, we are kind of narrowing down our diagnosis to a storage disorder. That's what we can say from
Yes.
what Dr. Sutapa and Dr. Prashant have ruled out other causes, and they've given reasons for why those other causes are unlikely. Basically, a portal cavernoma cholangiopathy is nothing but a dilated biliary system because of these leash of blood vessels, which can actually cause a mechanical compression of the bile duct and cause intrahepatic biliary dilatation, or an ischemic damage also to the bile ducts. And these patients are often asymptomatic, but you may find a raised alkaline phosphatase GGT in these patients, and the biliary radicals are dilated and they may develop stones. So just a little bit I thought would be important to know about this important differential diagnosis in our patient.
So coming back to our case, the child was investigated, and the labs were suggestive of a low hemoglobin and a low platelet count. The retic count and the peripheral smear were normal. The liver function test was all normal, except the AST and ALT showed just mild elevations.
Dr. Sutapa, does the investigation add on to your differential diagnosis? Does it help you in kind of narrowing it down further, or not really?
There are two cell lines in the blood are depressed, that is hemoglobin is low and the platelet count is low. But I cannot call it due to hypersplenism, because in hypersplenism there is hyperplasia of the marrow and the retic count is high. Here the retic count is 1.4% normal. So it does not go in favor of hypersplenism, but it may be due to marrow suppression of the marrow, myelosuppression due to some infiltrative disorder. The albumin is normal, total protein is normal, bilirubin is in range. PTA and INR are normal. So it points to the diagnosis that there may be the myeloid infiltration. It is not a case of hypersplenism, though the 2 cell lines are decreased.
Yeah, and the liver function is maintained.
Normal.
Resolved. Yeah.
Liver function is normal in range.
Okay. Dr. Prashant, what would you like to do further?
Madam, if we closely analyze the liver function test, the GGT is also fairly normal.
Right.
So the possibility of infiltrative disorder is also on hold actually right now.
Hmm. So does it could it still be a storage disorder as you thought it would be?
Yes, it could be still also
A storage
clinically going by.
So from here, we can say it's a storage disorder with 2 cell lines affected. And these seem to be more due to bone marrow affection and infiltration, as you may call it, rather than just the spleen being enlarged and hypersplenism. So what tests would you like to do further, Dr. Prashant, to come to a diagnosis?
I think a peripheral smear can be added.
Yeah, we have a peripheral smear here. It's normal.
Peripheral smear is normal. Then
to come to the diagnosis, you're thinking of a storage disorder.
The common storage disorders which we have considered are, one is Gaucher's disease and the other one is Niemann-Pick disease. So probably we can go for a specific enzyme assays with regard to these entities which we have considered.
Would you not like to do bone marrow aspiration? You're saying bone marrow all the time.
All these things are nowadays in the evolving situation. All these are of only historical importance. We won't want to subject these children for invasive things. We have so many other non-invasive things. I mean, relatively non-invasive things at our disposal. So in order to make the diagnosis alone, we need not subject to bone marrow examination.
Okay. So you want
May I add?
Yes, Dr. Sutapa.
In resource poor setting, if we go for bone marrow study and get the storage cell, that will support our diagnosis. That is not the final diagnosis because there are several other conditions like granulocytic leukemia and myeloma. They also present with similar kind of large cells with wrinkled cytoplasm. But in final diagnosis is by enzyme estimation or molecular testing. But where those facilities are not available or affordable, the bone marrow study in that case may support our diagnosis. That's all, but it is not the final one.
We'll talk about it in a minute, but before that, I think any hepatosplenomegaly or splenohepatomegaly, we would want an ultrasound. Just mainly, as we said, we need to categorize our patients as having portal hypertension or not having portal hypertension. Of course, in this child, clearly it seemed that it was mainly a case of a storage disorder, but we still want to know whether there is evidence of portal hypertension or not. And this sonography did not show any portal hypertension as one would have expected. Somebody also got a fundus examination done to look for cherry red spots. Any significance of these cherry red spots, Dr. Sutapa? Why would you want to look at the fundus? Mike, please unmute your mic.
In type B Niemann-Pick disease, we can see the cherry red spots in the macula.
Yeah, so since that's a closed differential. Yeah,
it helps in the differential diagnosis.
So always, as we have been taught, simple, non-invasive tests first. So this was done. There were no cherry red spots in this child.
In any metabolic liver disease or any metabolic disease, you must go for examination of the eyes, not only for cherry red spot, but also for cataract and also for the cave ring and all. So eye examination is a must in case of a metabolic liver disease.
Yeah, and cherry red spots are not specific for Niemann-Pick, though that's the commonest one. There could be
many also available in many others, hyalodysis type 1 and other conditions also.
Many other conditions, yeah. So we've come to specific examinations. Now, a bone marrow was done in this patient before this patient came to us. And Dr. Prashant very rightly said that we don't need a marrow to come to a diagnosis. Even Dr. Ganguly, now we have the ability of sending these a drop of blood on the dry blood spot filter paper, just a drop of blood, and send it off to the labs anywhere in the country. There are many labs now doing it even free of charge, where you can measure the enzyme leukocyte beta glucosidase. So I would say that whichever city you are in, I would like differ there and say now in today's day and age, it is possible to get this test done almost anywhere, because earlier there used to be a problem of sending the blood samples to the labs. Transport used to be an issue. We were not sure whether the enzymes could get degraded and not get measured. And therefore, one would always send a second enzyme. The lab would actually measure a second enzyme along with the enzyme which you were looking for, just to be sure that, yes, your control enzyme was normal and the speculated deficiency was actually there. But in today's day and age with the DBS, things have become much more easy. And I think these can be just sent by regular courier to the lab you want to get this test done from. So that is now made simpler. So anyway, this child had a beta glucosidase, which is a diagnostic test for Gaucher done, and this was significantly low. It was done on a DBS kit. And in addition, there was this enzyme called chitotriosidase done. Dr. Prashant, do you want to kind of comment on this enzyme?
Is also another biomarker for this Gaucher's.
Yeah, it's a biomarker, but it's not specific for Gaucher. Yeah, it tells you about the burden of Gaucher cells. So it's a good marker to follow up the patient on, to see how patient is doing on therapy. So, so in this condition, it is very high. It can be much higher than this. It can also be high in Niemann-Pick disease, but in Niemann-Pick, the levels are not as high as in Gaucher disease. And in 6% of a population, there's a polymorphism where chitotriosidase is normal, even if the patient may have Gaucher or any of these other diseases. So it's important to know that a normal chito does not rule out Gaucher disease. And then finally, a mutation analysis of the enzyme was done. And the patient had the most common mutation, which we see in the country, the L44P mutation, homozygous. The top panel, the 14480 replaced by C, is the new term for the L44P mutation. 70% of Indian population is having this mutation. It is thought to be characteristic of Gaucher type 3, which is the neuronopathic type of Gaucher disease. But we are also seeing it in type 1 in our country, and this is being actually looked at. So the diagnosis made in this patient was Gaucher disease type 1, which is the non-neuronopathic Gaucher. Palak? Dr. Palak?
Sorry. So when do you suspect a Gaucher's disease? Gaucher's disease is the commonest lysosomal disorder all over the world and also in India. The child generally presents with a massive splenohepatomegaly, anemia, thrombocytopenia, bone pains and fractures, and failure to thrive. There is always a significant family history, and with or without neurological involvement, and absence of portal hypertension. So type 1 Gaucher's is generally a non-neuronopathic type. Type 2 is a neuronopathic type, which is severe and fatal by 2 years of age. And type 3 is neuronopathic, milder variety and progressive. Deficiency of the enzyme beta glucosidase is the gold standard for diagnosis of Gaucher's disease.
So basically, we do not now use the term 1, 2, and 3. We say non-neuronopathic or neuronopathic. And in neuronopathic, we have type 2 and type 3. Type 2 usually do not survive beyond 2 years. Type 3 is what we see in our children when they present to us. Most of the type 2s would not be alive and would probably be seen by their primary pediatrician when they are 1 year or less than a year of age. So, so just a word about treatment. Basically, there is, because of this enzyme which is deficient, there is excess abnormal lipid called glucocerebroside, which is accumulated in the macrophages. And what one can do, and that is what causes the organomegaly, bone marrow infiltration, etc. So there is this enzyme which actually converts glucocerebroside into the metabolic products, which is deficient. So one could actually infuse this enzyme, which is done every 15 days, or one can reduce the production of the substrate, which is glucocerebroside, by what is known as drugs called substrate reduction therapy. And we have a drug called eliglustat, which is used for this purpose, but this is only approved for use in adults more than 18 years of age. But the advantage is it's an oral drug. We have 5 minutes to go. So Palak, can you tell us what happened to our patient?
Yes. So 6 months post enzyme replacement therapy, Cerezyme 60 units per kg was infused intravenously every 2 weeks. And the labs showed significant improvement with a rise in hemoglobin and platelet count. And the rest of the parameters also showed significant improvement with increase in height, weight, and the spans of the organs also reduced. So enzyme replacement therapy, we have enzymes imiglucerase, taliglucerase, and velaglucerase alpha. All of them improve organomegaly and cytopenias in Gaucher's patients.
So the challenge in Gaucher really is that getting this enzyme replacement therapy, most of our patients in the country, I think around 250 patients have been treated on a compassionate grounds for this disease, which is the commonest. We used to think that it doesn't really occur in India. Large spleens were often called tropical splenomegaly syndromes or chronic malaria. And we know that these large spleens were probably storage disorders, which we did not have the ability to diagnose. We did not have the tests, which are now quite freely available. The only problem is that replacement therapy is still a challenge. It's the patients who've got it in the country have got it on compassionate grounds from the pharma companies which manufacture these drugs. But there's a whole lot of activity going on at the level of NGOs and a lot of advocacy from patient support groups trying to tell the government that they should supply it at a cheaper cost, and to have some Indian companies make these drugs, because none of the companies in India are making this drug. Now, what is important to remember is that this is really helpful in type 1 Gaucher disease, the non-neuronopathic type. In type 2 and 3, 2 almost nothing is actually helpful. In type 3, it may arrest the neurological condition to some extent, but does not completely reverse it, and it may still slowly progress. So there is really a need for therapy which actually crosses the blood-brain barrier and can improve the neurological or neuronopathic Gaucher patients. Palak?
Yes. So now we come to the mechanism of splenomegaly. You can have hematological disorders causing spleens to enlarge in thalassemia and hereditary spherocytosis. We have sinusoidal distension in portal hypertension and splenic vein thrombosis. Anatomical space occupying lesions where cysts, hemangiomas, etc. are causing the spleen to enlarge. Infiltrative disorders like we have in our case, Gaucher's, lymphomas and leukemias, and hyperplasia of the reticuloendothelial system, the cells of the spleen, which can be because of infection or secondary to connective tissue disorders.
So in short, the splenomegaly could be due to almost any reason, and depending on how the child has presented, acutely, chronically, incidentally picked up, what are the associated symptoms and signs, which we elaborated in great detail, one can narrow down the cause of the splenomegaly. And this pretty much was the approach to a patient with splenomegaly. Dr. Sutappa and Dr. Prashant, would you have any comments on this?
Fairly all causes have been covered, madam.
Yeah.
When you get a patient with splenomegaly, the most importantly, we have to give importance to the anthropometric measurements. If there is gross reduction of anthropometric measurements, it points more towards the storage disease. In portal venous obstruction, even in extrahepatic portal venous obstruction, in more than 50% cases, there is retardation in the physical growth due to poor absorption, due to portal enteropathy, or maybe the child is deprived of important hepatotropic factors due to poor blood supply to the liver, or as Palak has told that there is some insulin resistance and low IGF-1, but the retardation of physical growth is not that much as compared to a storage disease. And family history is more important. And here there is no family history and no history of consanguinity, but still we have come, Abha has nicely explained evaluated a case of Gaucher's disease, the classical type. So not necessarily always we will get a history of consanguinity and a positive family history or a history of sibling death, but we have to evaluate the patient overall, all the features, the intellectual development, physical development, presence of jaundice and all, so that we can come to right diagnosis, correct diagnosis with those simple investigations.
Thank you.
The blood count, LFT, ultrasound, they helped us to clinch the diagnosis, and it was confirmed by enzyme assay and molecular testing.
Yes,
So nice case.
Madam.
Thank you, Abha.
yeah.
So-
Palak would conclude.
So concluding our presentation, a child with progressive splenomegaly with liver cell failure and portal hypertension, extrahepatic portal venous obstruction, cirrhosis and congenital hepatic fibrosis are important causes which should be considered. In a child with progressive splenomegaly, in the absence of liver cell dysfunction and portal hypertension, storage disorders like non-neuronopathic Gaucher's and Niemann-Pick B should be considered. With a progressive splenomegaly and presence of neurosymptoms, neuronopathic Gaucher's disease and Niemann-Pick C should be considered. Measurement of leukocyte beta glucosidase is a gold standard for diagnosis of Gaucher's disease, can be done on DBS filter paper. And enzyme replacement therapy improves cytopenias and organomegaly in Gaucher's disease patients.
Thank you, Palak. Thank you, Dr. Sutapa,
Thank you.
Dr. Prashant, for participating, and a big thanks to Dr. Mathai and Dr. Naresh for organizing a first e-conference of ISPGHAN, and I'm sure this is the way to go for the future. Thank you all.